Welcome, everyone. Today, we are diving into the true secret of professional prompt engineering, iterative refinement. Let's get started and transform how you collaborate with AI. Welcome to our deep dive on iterative refinement. If you've ever felt frustrated that Claude didn't give you exactly what you wanted on the very first try, I have a secret for you. Professional prompt engineers rarely nail it on the first try either. Instead, they rely on a process called iterative refinement. What this means is that we stop treating the AI like a search engine where you put in one query and get one perfect answer. Instead, we treat it like a collaborative colleague. The basics of this concept involve setting up a conversation loop. We provide an initial prompt to get a rough shape of our output, and then we work with Claude to sculpt it. Why do we do this? Because Claude's true superpower isn't just generating text, it's pattern recognition and contextual revision. When we leverage this loop, we can build highly complex, professional-grade outputs that a single, massive prompt could never achieve. Take a look at this flowchart, which illustrates the core architecture of our conversation loop. It all begins on the left with your initial prompt. This generates Claude's first draft. But notice that this isn't the end of the line. We immediately enter the feedback loop in the center. Instead of starting over, we provide a critique, which forms a refined prompt. Claude processes this to generate an improved second draft. This cycle can repeat as many times as necessary, spiraling tighter and tighter until we exit the loop on the right with our final masterpiece. This is the heartbeat of advanced prompt engineering. Now, let's break down how this conversation loop actually functions in practice through the core iteration cycle. This is a four-step framework that you can apply to any task. Step 1 is the first attempt. Your goal here is simply to get the basic structure and ideas out of the model. Step 2 is analyze. You look at Claude's output and ask yourself, what's working here and what's missing? Step 3 is where the magic happens, refine. Instead of rewriting it yourself, you ask Claude to adjust specific elements. For example, you might say, this is a great structure, but make the tone more professional. Step 4 is simply to repeat this process. The biggest mistake beginners make is the kitchen sink approach, dumping every single instruction, constraint, and formatting rule into one massive initial prompt. By using the iteration cycle, you reduce cognitive load on both yourself and the model, refining the output step by step. This simple circular diagram represents your new best friend, the iteration cycle. Notice how it flows continuously. From the first attempt at the top left, we move clockwise to analyze, down to refine, over to repeat, and right back to the start. The beauty of this visual is that it reminds us that writing with AI is not a linear path from A to B. It is a continuous, circular refining process. Every time you travel around this circle, your output becomes sharper, more aligned with your voice, and infinitely more valuable. Let's move into a deep dive on one of the most powerful techniques in our toolkit, Claude critiquing Claude, also known as the self-correction pattern. We know Claude can generate text, but it is also an exceptional editor and critic. Instead of you doing all the heavy lifting in the analyze step, we can offload that to the AI. Here is how you do it. After Claude generates a first draft, you give it a new prompt asking it to adopt a critical persona. You might say, act as a senior editor. Review the draft above against our brand guidelines. Identify 3 areas for improvement. Claude will output a critique. Then, you issue the refinement prompt. Now, rewrite the draft, incorporating your own feedback. Why is this so effective? Because it forces the model to engage its deep reasoning and analytical capabilities before it writes the final text. It creates a structured chain of thought that drastically reduces errors and elevates quality. Let's walk through the sequence diagram to see the self-correction interaction play out over time. On the left, we have the user, and on the right, Claude. The user starts by asking for a first draft. Claude returns it. Next, the user sends a specific prompt asking Claude to critique that very draft against a set of criteria. Claude processes this and returns a critical analysis, essentially grading its own homework. Finally, the user says, rewrite it based on your critique. Claude executes this, delivering a vastly improved second draft. This back-and-forth sequence is the hallmark of advanced AI collaboration. When you are working on long-form content, applying the self-correction pattern can sometimes feel overwhelming if you try to fix everything at once. This brings us to the systematic iteration method, a structured, multi-pass approach to editing with Claude. Just like a professional sculptor works from the general shape down to the fine details, we do the same with our prompts. Pass 1 focuses entirely on structure and flow. You ask Claude, is the information in a logical order? Once that is fixed, you move to Pass 2, clarity and precision. Here, you ask Claude to cut the fluff and simplify complex ideas. Pass 3 is enrichment. This is where you say, add specific, real-world examples to paragraph 2. Finally, Pass 4 is the polish and proofread, dialing in the perfect tone. By separating these concerns into distinct conversational turns, Claude can focus its entire context window on perfecting one specific aspect of the document at a time. This layered stack diagram visualizes how we build a document's quality from the ground up. At the foundational base, we have Pass 1, structure and flow. We must ensure the foundation is solid before moving up. Next is Pass 2, where we refine clarity and precision. Building on that, we reach Pass 3, injecting enrichment and examples to make the content engaging. Finally, at the very peak, we apply Pass 4 for the final polish and tone. You cannot polish a structure that is fundamentally broken, which is why iterating through these layers sequentially guarantees a high-quality end product. As you master the conversation loop for refining text, you unlock an even more advanced technique, meta-prompting. This is where we step outside the document we are writing and use the iteration loop to improve the actual process of prompting. Meta-prompting means asking Claude to evaluate your prompts. For instance, if you get a mediocre first draft, instead of just trying to fix it, you can ask Claude, what information or constraints were missing from my initial prompt that would have helped you generate a better response? Claude will literally tell you what it needs. Another incredible use case is the self-optimizing workflow. Once you and Claude have iterated your way to a perfect final document, you can send a meta prompt saying, based on our conversation and this final result, write an optimized prompt template I can use in the future to get this exact quality on the first try. This technique transforms Claude from a writing assistant into your personal prompt engineering coach. This diagram illustrates the meta-prompting feedback loop. On the top path, your human prompt leads to Claude's output, which you evaluate. But instead of just tweaking the text, we take the bottom return path. We issue a meta prompt, asking Claude how to ask better next time. Claude analyzes the gap between its output and your expectations and suggests an optimized prompt. You then feed this optimized prompt right back into the beginning of the cycle. Over time, this loop aggressively sharpens your communication skills with AI systems. For those of you building applications using Claude's API, the iterative conversation loop translates directly into a technical pattern called prompt chaining. When building agentic systems, we don't rely on Claude to self-correct in a single, massive API response. Instead, we break the task into sequential API calls. The strategy is simple but robust. Call 1 generates the initial draft. We take the output of call 1 and feed it into call 2, where the system prompt explicitly asks the model to review the draft against specific criteria. Call 2 returns a critique. We then take the original draft and the critique and feed them into call 3 to generate the final refined output. Why do we separate these calls? Because it gives us, as developers, total control. It allows us to log the intermediate critiques, evaluate the pipeline's performance, and even branch the logic if the critique flags a critical error. Let's look at how this logic is structured. This flow diagram outlines our API prompt chaining architecture. The process begins at the top with API call 1, dedicated solely to generating the raw draft. The payload from that call, the draft text, is injected directly into API call 2. Call 2 operates under a strictly evaluative system prompt, outputting a critique. Finally, both the original draft and the critique converge into API call 3. Call 3 synthesizes these inputs to produce the final validated output at the bottom. This architecture guarantees a highly reliable, self-correcting AI pipeline. Let's ground this in a real-time, high-stakes use case. Imagine a lead researcher writing a complex grant proposal. This is a scenario where quality is paramount. The researcher starts by providing Claude with their raw data, research goals, and constraints, asking for a foundational first draft. Claude produces a good, but generic, proposal. Here is where the iterative loop shines. The researcher issues a new prompt. Now act as a highly skeptical grant review committee member. Read this proposal and identify 3 reasons you would reject it. Claude instantly pivots, analyzes the text, and points out that the methodology section lacks clear timelines and the budget justification is weak. The researcher then replies, "Excellent. Please rewrite the methodology and budget sections to completely eliminate those concerns." Claude refines its own work, transforming a mediocre first pass into an ironclad, highly persuasive document. This iterative loop saves hours of frustration and dramatically elevates the final product. This journey map tracks our researchers' experience through the iteration process. In the initial phase, the researcher enthusiastically provides data, and Claude generates a baseline draft. Moving into the critique phase, the researcher challenges Claude to perform a skeptical review. Claude successfully identifies critical weaknesses in the logic. Finally, in the refinement phase, the researcher commands a rewrite based on those very weaknesses, and Claude delivers a robust, highly polished final proposal. It is a seamless journey from raw data to a winning submission, powered entirely by iterative refinement. As we wrap up our training today, let's review the key takeaways for mastering the conversation loop. First and foremost, iterative refinement is the cornerstone of true AI collaboration. Stop striving for the perfect initial prompt. Start simple. Let the model get the ideas on the page without over-constraining it. When you enter the critique phase, give Claude clear, objective criteria to measure its work against. Ask it to check for specific logical fallacies, tone guidelines, or structural rules. And remember to use the multi-pass system. Fix the structure before you try to polish the grammar. The ultimate lesson here is that the quality of your final AI output is directly proportional to the quality of your feedback loop. If you want to master these advanced techniques and truly elevate your career, I invite you to like, subscribe, and visit quicktechie.com for premium certification prep, including Q&A banks, full ebooks, audiobooks, full-length training, and interview guides. Let's conclude by looking at this mind map, which summarizes our entire strategy for mastering the loop. At the core is our main goal. Branching out, we see our key pillars. Start simple reminds us to get that first draft without overthinking. Self-critique reinforces the need for clear criteria and distinct personas. Multi-pass editing reminds us to build structure before applying the final polish. And finally, meta-prompting pushes us to constantly optimize our prompts and learn directly from the AI. Keep this mental model with you, and your prompt engineering skills will be unstoppable.